Oftentimes, once you're finished building or pre-vising your project in GeoPix, you're going to want to actually connect this to real lights and take it into the real world, whether that be a VJ set or a long-term art installation, whatever it might be. Once you get to that point, you're going to be a lot more concerned with performance and a lot less concerned with the way things look in the viewport. The visual quality of your project is no longer of importance, and nobody's going to be seeing the computer. Maybe it's going to be in a server room somewhere, or you just have the lights and the rig in front of you, and maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But regardless, there comes a time where you're going to want to optimize your project and make it run as fast as possible, because you want to give that performance to your Perform tab and your macros that live in the I/O tab, and those, depending on what you have going on, can consume a decent amount of resources. So making room for that and making sure that everything that doesn't need to be on is off is an important step. So that's what we're going to talk about here in this video. So here we've got a very simple scene that will do for the purposes of kind of describing where these optimizations live. We've got a piece of geometry here, a projector. We have a fixture that's just got some basic patterns coming from a macro, and we have a bunch of other stuff in the viewport that just honestly looks kind of cluttered and not that helpful. So we're going to go through the process of kind of fine-tuning this so that it's as fast as it can be without getting rid of the pixels, because maybe it would still be nice to have that in our Perform tab for us to kind of quickly verify that things look like they should. So first thing I'll go ahead and mention is we can actually turn stuff off here individually. So if you have a projector, for example, you can toggle this off and the projector will still function as you'd expect. But this isn't the case for everything. Some things like a fixture, if you turn that off, it actually turns off the fixture altogether. So depending on what it is, you might be able to get away with that and you might not. But you also start running into the problem of things being collapsed and you don't see them, and you have to go looking for the thing that's hidden. So a lot of times it's nice to have a global option for toggling these things on and off as well. So for that, we need to go to File and Preferences, and over here in the first section called Editor Settings, we have kind of a chunk of parameters here at the top that are all toggle parameters. So the way these are set up, it's really supposed to be just a mindless process. If you want performance and declutter things, you just start from the top and click these all to off. This first section here is really going to focus on turning on and off the kind of visual graph lines and icons. This is like a global icons toggle, so this will turn off all the icons that you see here for everything, and it won't matter what they are here in the outliner. Projectors is a global toggle for all projectors, so if I have this on in the viewport there, turning it off here will still hide all of them everywhere. So having a global toggle is nice for that. So anyways, we've turned these four at the top off. We already have a much emptier looking scene, and this is going to help our performance a tiny bit, but mostly those four are for clutter and just getting things out of your way. The next section here, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 parameters, turning these off is going to give you back a little performance as well, but it's also going to help declutter your fixtures. So one of the things you probably noticed was the pix line, which is this very thin dark blue line that kind of cuts through all of our pixels. And this is very useful when you're building out your scene. But once you're there, once you're done, you probably want to see these pixels as dots of light and not as points on a logical signal chain. So turning that off is going to give you a little performance back, but it's also just going to make things look a lot better in the viewport. Moving on along, down below that, we have some UI elements that are actually not in viewport. They're actually window elements in the actual main window here, and those things aren't hitting performance as much when you're not using them. But if you want that clean presentation view, you might want to turn those off. It really depends. This axis gizmo as well, it is not hurting your performance when you're just sitting there, but if you're moving around, that's going to add a little bit of overhead. So Turning that off doesn't hurt. Basically, rule of thumb here is if you just go down the line and turn all of these to off, you'll be in pretty good shape. If you turn off the right bar, just keep in mind you won't have access to the outliner or the attributes anymore, so if that's something that you need, just leave that on. So that about does it for the editor parameters, but we still have a pretty not great performance down here. If you look in the bottom left, our FPS is 36, kind of fluctuating a bit, and that's actually because we have quite a bit of lighting effects going on. We have the actual lighting that's kind of hitting this piece of geometry, which is, you know, running a PBR material, so it's not the cheapest. And we also have some very subtle volumetrics happening around these pixels as well. So that's just a lot of information that we are calculating for the sake of having a nice looking image here, but that's just not necessary for, you know, a streamlined performance previs. In fact, I would argue that that piece of geometry, while it looks cool, is really distracting us from what the content looks like, right? You can't see that as clearly from like a front-on view. So we may actually want to just turn those things off altogether. So I'm going to bring up my preferences again, and I'm going to turn on the right bar because we're going to just need to be in here in the outliner a bit. So we have our geometry here. I'm just going to turn that off, and that's going to get us back up to 60, but we still have a lot of expense with this volumetric effect, and it's just not really helping us all that much, you know, in this system. So we're going to turn these things off as well. So to turn these things off, we have to kind of dive into the lighting parameters, and there's two ways to get to that. You can click on it in the outliner, or you can also go to File Preferences and go to Lighting Settings. These were basically tweaking the same exact parameters, just from two different places. And there's a few sections in here that matters. You know, you have your environment lighting, your point lighting, and your cone lighting. So these three sections can be quite heavy. Not as much the environment lighting, but if you turn that off, you will get a little bit of your performance back, especially if you have geometry visible, but turning it off anyways doesn't hurt. Next down in the line is the point lighting section, and this is actually what we have enabled for our fixture here, because these are, you know, configured as point lights currently. So we can turn off the volumetrics, and we can also turn off the lighting, because this parameter is only really helping us illuminate geometry. If we don't have geometry in the scene, this actually isn't doing us any good whatsoever. So turning off the lighting and the volumetrics, and doing the same for cone lighting, although the caveat with cone lighting is if you're doing custom fixtures with, you know, DMX moving lights, you're actually going to need the volumetrics enabled to see the cone of light, which is pretty important to, you know, doing look development and stuff like that. So, you know, keep that in mind. You may actually need that for cone lighting, but if you need to keep that on, you can turn the buffer size down to 1/2 or 1/4. And you can also turn the ray march steps down. There'll be another video that really focuses on, you know, all of these parameters in the lighting section, so we won't spend too much time with that. Just know that you can turn those two things down and get a lot of performance back too. Clustering is another one that you can turn on if you have, like, you know, thousands of pixels in your scene, and you just, you're just bringing your performance down to a few FPS. Turning this on is really a must. You really just have to turn this on. It kind of helps reduce the overall number of emitters in your scene, and it really just helps spread things out. But again, that's an advanced topic for a lighting only video, so we won't really delve into that too much here. Next, we have image effects. This is actually an important category as well, and it will help, especially if you have geometry visible, but even if you don't, it's running anyways. So turning off ambient occlusion and turning off bloom, and you can even turn off the tone map if you want, although this is pretty cheap. If you do turn those things off, you're probably going to want to set your Pix color gain to 1. And if you're using surfaces, you may want to turn that to 1 as well. Now, this is not a performance setting, but this does give you more screen-oriented color ranges that actually make sense from a content perspective. What these are default set to are numbers that kind of simulate in a non-technically accurate way real brightness values and how they kind of look super white in the centers and they bloom out with color on the outer edge. But having this set to 1 and 1 makes your pixels look more like this texture, right? Which is going to give you a better view of the content potentially. So this is actually kind of hard to tell because it's not very dense. So let me go ahead and make this a little bit more dense so we can just see. Okay, so that's a lot more pixels, and that kind of helps us see that gradient, right? We can really see the colors because they're totally in the 0 to 1 range, whereas when this is set to 5, it looks a little bit more realistic when you have lighting effects happening in your project, but it's a little bit harder to tell what's going on with the content, and it might look incorrect. So you may want this to be 1 for the sake of, you know, having a clean aesthetic that's really content oriented. So that's pretty much it. You can turn these two off if you want, but they're not going to make that much difference in, you know, a geometryless scene. And that's pretty much all you can do to optimize your editor. So once you've done that, you really are just down to the point sprites that represent the fixture. And this is going to give you a really good performance in the editor, as good as it's going to get. And in the Perform tab, it's going to be quite well too. So this will allow you to do interesting things and kind of just VJ and test things out. And it'll be pretty low on the render threads. So if you turn this off, this will, you know, bring the performance all the way down, and it gives you a decent amount back. This is still the best way to go, but you know, if you need to see what you're doing, but you want it to be performant, this is the most performant you can probably get while still seeing your pixels. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and stick around for the other ones because we'll be talking about some stuff in the lighting section and really optimizing GeoPix for kind of the other end of the spectrum where you really want that visual fidelity, and performance may be secondary. So that's it for now. Thanks.